Okay, as some of you may remember, what we were trying to do in this project was test this particular model of how wisdom might be developing in the course of somebody's life. Very briefly speaking, the idea is that we all face some challenges in our lives, which might be all kinds of really kind of difficult changes in our lives that force us to rethink priorities. And we learn from those challenges, but only some of us learn things that move us towards wisdom. Others may be learning things that actually move them away from wisdom towards something like bitterness or all kinds of other things. And the question is, why do some people move towards wisdom in their lives? And we've proposed these 4 resources: a sense of mastery, openness, a reflective attitude, and emotion regulation skills, which by now I prefer to call empathy plus emotion regulation skills. As 4 kind of critical resources that help some people to move towards wisdom. And so what we were trying to do in this project was find people who are nominated by others as wise and compare them to a control group of basically a population representative sample, and asking those people about the most difficult experiences in their lives, what the experience was, how they dealt with it, what they've learned from it, and all kinds of specific questions about that. By now, we actually have 44 wisdom nominees whom we've interviewed, and one thing I've learned a lot of things already in this project. One thing I've learned is that being nominated as wise doesn't really mean you are wise at all. I mean, we definitely have some fantastic people in this sample who are really fascinating and really certainly wise in some sense, but we have others who are just, all kinds of other things than wise. So that's one thing I've learned. We have a nice age range of nominees from 33 to actually 92 years, and most of them are older than 33 actually. We have, I've learned now from my co-workers that we have more than 80. We're going to have something like 120 control participants covering quite an age range. We have interviewed, I think, something like 40 of them by now. And the data that I've been looking into is based on, I think, 42 wisdom nominees and 27 or so control individuals. We presented them with what we call the life story matrix, which is just basically a list that they make of their most difficult life events, and then they rate them for things such as control over the event. And we have, what's more important, we have this interview where we ask them about their difficult life events and all kinds of things related to that. And we have already analyzed, and we also collected as much as we try to measure wisdom in those ways that are available at the moment, though we are kind of critical of those approaches. And the nice thing is that we have very low correlations among the 4 measures of wisdom. And I remember that you told me 2 years ago that this might become a problem, and I said, no, we can deal with that. It turns out now that we've included some of the control participants, we do have some correlations among those measures, and it turns out there are at least 2 factors of wisdom measures which are basically independent. So the selection, who is really wise in our sample of wisdom nominees and control participants, is still one of the problems that we are facing. We have collected scale data on those 4 resources that we're proposing, and we've also collected intelligence more as a control measure. And what we've learned by now, we've learned lots of things, especially, critical things. One thing we've learned is that it's really difficult to code those interview transcripts for those 4 resources, because it's not like people are really talking about how they tried to be open or how they reflected upon things. You can tell from what they say that they've reflected a lot or they've reflected very little about their experience, but it's not really there in terms of being a piece of text that you can code for reflection. It's more something like an overall impression of the text, and we are now trying to devise a code book that will somehow help us to kind of standardize those overall impressions, which is a difficult thing. It's somehow similar to what the Berlin Wisdom Paradigm is doing with those criteria they have. So we have a model there on how we can do that. Another thing I've learned, what's really nice is that my impression is that in addition to those 4 resources, other things are coming up in those protocols that we weren't really expecting or we weren't really thinking about that much. And one of these things is gratitude, which turns out to be some major issue that the wisdom nominees are talking about, being grateful for things that have happened to them. Okay. Another thing is that I find very interesting is something like self-understanding, some kind of intuition that they often talk about, that they just felt what was right and they were kind of looking at what they were feeling to find out what was right in a situation. And the third thing is Much of what they talk about is the acceptance of uncontrollability, that you basically have to accept and deal with things that just happen and that you can't control. And that's something that I find very interesting and that really comes out of the data, basically. So maybe the MORE model will be something very different in the end. Okay, we are still interviewing control participants. The lucky thing is I have another grant which is going for 1 more year, so I'll have a chance to kind of finish part of this up. And we are trying to work on this code book very intensively at the moment to really come up with some good definitions that we can work with. Okay, that's it, thank you. Yeah, okay, forget that part.